The expanse of land had fallen silent. This was not the gentle stillness of twilight, when the chirping of crickets begins and the wind softens through the cornstalks. This was a profound quiet, the kind that descends when a multitude of people find themselves out of words. 4 firms specializing in heavy lifting had dispatched their most capable machinery. 50 tons of equipment stood ready, their hydraulic arms extended wide, cables stretched taut like the strings of a bow. These companies hailed from 3 distinct administrative districts. The most imposing apparatus belonged to a firm based in Des Moines, a company known for its expertise in lifting steel girders from the remnants of fractured bridges. These were seasoned professionals, and each one had just delivered the same disheartening prognosis to the same family. We are unable to extract it. There, in a low-lying section of a 70-acre soybean field, a combine harvester weighing 91,000 pounds was submerged beyond its axles in the rich, dark earth of Iowa. 3 consecutive days of relentless September rainfall had transformed the normally firm ground into a viscous, cement-like mire, holding the colossal machine in an unyielding grip. Over the course of 2 days, the crane operators had attempted 6 distinct strategies. Each effort resulted in either the failure of the rigging or the alarming instability of the immense vehicle. To the seasoned individuals present, the combine was not merely lodged, it was irretrievably lost. Then, a voice from the rear of the assembled throng broke the silence, asking, "Who is that arriving?" At the entrance to the field, a 12-year-old girl ascended to the driver's seat of a well-worn 1953 John Deere. Its verdant paint had worn away to reveal a primer gray beneath on the hood, and a single rear wheel was ballast-heavy with cast iron. She advanced the throttle, grasped the manual clutch, and brought the engine to life. The distinctive sound it produced was unlike anything else in the vicinity, not the deep thrum of hydraulics, nor the high-pitched whine of a crane's motor, but a 2-cylinder rhythm, akin to a steady heartbeat, a gentle put, put, put. Her dark auburn hair was neatly tucked beneath a seed corn cap, and her boots were conspicuously oversized by 3 full sizes. Her name was Willa May Granger. She guided the vintage tractor through the gate, brought it to a halt approximately 20 yards from the nearest crane, silenced the engine, and sat contemplating the submerged combine with the focused intensity one might apply to a familiar mathematical puzzle. A hushed anticipation settled over the onlookers. No one openly scoffed, yet no one moved either. Could this young girl possess an insight that had eluded all the experienced professionals? If your heart resonates with narratives of industrious individuals and the enduring spirit of old-fashioned determination, we invite you to join us. Leave a comment below and share your location. It would be wonderful to know you are part of our community. The Granger family farm encompassed 340 acres on the outskirts of Harlan, Iowa. This land had remained within the family for so long that local maps simply designated it as Granger Ground, without further explanation. Willa May had been familiar with operating farm equipment long before her feet could comfortably reach the pedals. Her grandfather, Delbert Granger, known to all as Del, had initiated her training on the venerable 1953 John Deere Model 50 when she was just 7 years old. He affectionately, though perhaps not with deep sentiment, called it Granny Green, a moniker earned by its remarkable longevity, having survived 2 devastating floods and a direct lightning strike. Del, now 81 years old, no longer worked the fields on foot. His knees had failed him in the same year his wife had passed away. He spent his mornings at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee in hand, gazing out the eastward-facing window. Yet, he still spoke of the soil with an authority and reverence comparable to how some men discuss sacred texts. What Willa May grasped, a comprehension often beyond the grasp of many 12-year-olds, was this fundamental principle. Old machinery was conceived and constructed in harmony with the land, not the other way around. The combine, now entombed in the earth, belonged to her neighbor, Russ Heidecker, a third-generation farmer who had taken out a second mortgage 2 years prior to acquire it. It represented his entire livelihood. The standing soybean crop in the field held an estimated market value of roughly $180,000. Without the combine, there was no possibility of harvesting the crop before the inevitable first hard frost. And without that harvest, Russ harbored grave doubts about his ability to survive the winter. This dire predicament was the reason for the presence of the 4 crane companies and the reason for the gathered crowd. It was also the reason why Willa May Granger, having learned of the situation through her grandfather's police scanner, had started Granny Green without seeking anyone's permission. The crane operators understood a primary challenge, a colossal weight. 91,000 pounds is roughly equivalent to the mass of 8 adult bull elephants. On solid surfaces like gravel, packed earth, or asphalt, extricating a machine of such magnitude is achievable with appropriate rigging and a precise angle of pull. However, this scenario presented none of those conditions. What none of the crane operators had accounted for in their training was the specific physical behavior of saturated Iowa black soil following an extended period of rain. This is precisely where the knowledge of agriculture and the principles of engineering diverge in ways of critical importance. When soil absorbs an excessive amount of water, it doesn't merely soften. It develops what agricultural scientists term negative pore water pressure, essentially creating a powerful suction effect. The earth grips anything buried within it with a force akin to a vacuum sealing itself to a surface. The deeper the object, the stronger this hold becomes. The combine's header had plunged nearly 26 inches into the saturated soil in that low-lying corner of the field, an area that Russ's drainage tile system had never effectively served. The crane operators, attempting to pull directly upward or at slight angles, were focused on overcoming the sheer weight, but failed to account for this pervasive suction. Every cable was not only battling 91,000 pounds of machinery, but was also contending with the very ground itself, resisting the extraction. One operator attempted a lateral pull. This maneuver resulted in the failure of the rigging hardware. Applying a sideways force to a machine deeply embedded in soft ground does not facilitate sliding. It causes it to tilt. And a tilting 91,000-pound machine in wet soil will, in fact, dig one side deeper before it budges even an inch. These operators were not lacking in competence. They simply had not grown up observing firsthand the intricate behavior of soil. Willa May, however, had. The first action Willa May took upon dismounting Granny Green was to walk the perimeter of the field on foot. She moved away from the combine towards the edge of the affected low-lying area. With each few steps, she pressed the heel of her boot into the ground, testing its firmness, observing where water had collected and where it had receded, and noting even the slightest directional slope of the terrain. One of the crane operators, a man of broad shoulders named Keith Torrance, approached her. "Are you surveying a path for extraction?" he inquired, his tone not unkind. "I'm looking for the hard floor," Willa May responded. Keith did not immediately grasp her meaning, but Willa May's grandfather had once explained this very concept on a soggy spring morning when a disc harrow had sunk into a low spot, much like this one. He had told her, "The water always reveals the clay layer, Willa. The ground remains soft above it and becomes firm right at its surface. Locate that stratum, and you'll find your anchor." Clay subsoil, unlike topsoil, does not readily absorb water. Instead, it compacts and retains its structure. At a depth of approximately 14 to 18 inches below the surface of most Iowa fields of dark soil, there exists a stratum of solid clay that has remained undisturbed for 10,000 years. If the suction above this clay layer could be alleviated, if the soil could be coaxed into releasing the machine rather than clinging to it, the challenge of its immense weight would become manageable. Willa May had witnessed her grandfather achieve this very feat using a disc harrow and a simple garden spade. Now, she was about to attempt it with a 60-year-old tractor and a different kind of patience. She began by requesting something from Russ Heidecker that surprised everyone present. "Do you happen to have a soil probe? Anything I can push down 18 or 20 inches?" Russ provided her with a fence post driver and a length of half-inch steel rod. For 45 minutes, Willa May worked the rod into the soil around the combine's submerged header at 8 different locations. She did not pull or yank, but rather gently worked it in, rocking it from side to side before withdrawing it, thereby creating small channels. "She's aerating the soil," someone in the crowd remarked, with a hint of amusement. No one else joined in the laughter because, after the third rod insertion, a subtle change in sound occurred. A low, wet suction emanated from somewhere beneath the machine, indicating air reaching the clay layer. Keith Torrance had moved closer, his attention now fully captured. Willa May then repositioned Granny Green at a precise angle, not directly behind nor entirely to the side, but 40 degrees off the combine's center line, aimed towards the most stable ground she had identified during her earlier assessment. She attached a single logging chain, not to the frame of the combine, but to the housing of its rear axle, positioned lower than any of the crane cables had been rigged. On the first pull, the combine remained stationary, but the soil surrounding the header settled almost imperceptibly. "Again," she murmured to herself. "Second pull." Granny Green's rear wheels spun briefly, then gained purchase, and the chain became taut. A low groan emanated from the submerged machine. Third pull. The combine's header lifted by about half an inch on the left side. The crowd collectively shifted forward. On the 7th attempt, a release occurred. It was not a dramatic event, no sudden crack or loud roar. The soil simply relinquished its hold. The suction dissipated in a long, deep exhalation that could be heard from 20 feet away. It was a wet, hollow sound, like a boot being pulled from deep mud, but on an immense scale. Granny Green began to move forward at a slow, steady pace, the chain taut, its engine humming its familiar two-cylinder melody. The combine's header rose, followed by the front axle, and then the rear wheels, caked with dense Iowa earth, rolled free from the hole they had been trapped in for 3 days. Russ Heidecker placed both hands on the top of his head and stood utterly still. Keith Torrance removed his hard hat and gazed at it intently. Willa May silenced Granny Green's engine and sat in the sudden, profound quiet. The combine was out of the earth, coated in mud, with a dent on one corner of its header, but structurally sound and capable of operation. The combine subsequently ran for 11 consecutive days. Russ Heidecker successfully harvested his soybeans before the onset of the frost. Following his completion, 2 neighboring farms borrowed the machine. The harvest's proceeds were sufficient to cover his mortgage payment and sustain the farm through the spring. However, this is not the aspect of the story that occupies Willa May's thoughts. What she remembers most vividly is what transpired that evening, after the combine's recovery. She drove Granny Green back home and found her grandfather seated at the kitchen table, his usual spot. His coffee had long gone cold, and his gaze was fixed on the window facing east. She recounted the entire event to him, every minute detail, the rod channels, the precise angle, the crucial clay layer. Willa May Granger listened intently, without interruption. When she had finished speaking, he remained silent for a considerable moment. Then he spoke, his voice gentle. you remembered. He did not say, you were brave, or you saved the day, but simply, you remembered. For that was precisely what it was. Not an act of magic or extraordinary genius, but a vital lesson, carefully transmitted from one generation to the next, entrusted to a child who possessed the attentiveness to absorb it. As George Washington Carver once wisely stated, "Where there is no vision, there is no hope." In the realm of farming, vision transcends mere looking towards the horizon. It signifies the capacity to perceive what truly lies before you. This includes understanding how water flows, how soil breathes, and how the unseen layers beneath the surface hold secrets that machinery alone cannot decipher. The four crane companies, confronted with 91,000 pounds, viewed it as a mechanical engineering challenge. Willa May Granger, observing the same weight, recognized it as a soil-related issue. This fundamental difference encapsulates the entire narrative of American agriculture. It is a chronicle of knowledge carried within the hands and voices of individuals who learned to interpret the land before they could decipher written words. This wisdom must be deliberately passed down from those who retain the memories to those who are still young enough to believe in its significance. Willa May held that belief. And on that frigid September morning in a flooded Iowa field, that belief set 91,000 pounds in motion. What piece of wisdom, passed down from an elder, proved to be precisely correct when it mattered most to you? Share your story in the comments below. We genuinely read every submission.